Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò. My name is Stefano Albertini. I'm a migrant and I'm also the director of Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò. Tonight we have the pleasure of presenting this book, but it's also something more than a presentation in the intentions that Andrea, Prencipe and I had, an occasion to talk about the relationship between the humanities, the sciences, technology, and many more things. And what struck me the first time I met Andrea, he was then the rector of LUIS, the university in Rome, that is one of the most important universities when it comes to social sciences, law, economics, and political science, is that he made mandatory 2 courses of literature and philosophy. That won me, okay? Because in a moment in which the humanities are under such attack, without any other synonym to define it, he had the courage, not being in a humanistic university, to affirm the importance of the humanities. So his books reflect these reflection that he made on higher education as a rector, but also as a professor, as he continues to do. We have a great panel to talk about this tonight, and we have a great moderator with us tonight, who is Francesca Giuliani Hoffman, who is a journalist and producer for CNN here in New York City. And I'm delighted because I'm leaving you in very, very good hands of the best moderator you can hope to have. Please welcome our panel. Thank you.
No question.
My bad, because we have also one greeting from Elena. Elena, come over. Elena represents AIRI, that is the Association of Italian Researchers and Scientists here in New York. It's a group of about 200-300 people, if I understand correctly. And
yes.
They were on board when we organized this to help us co-sponsor, co-organize it. Elena.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you so much for the collaboration that AIRE has together with Casa Italiana. We're really happy to be here today, but also we are really happy for all the opportunity that you give us throughout this year. Just for your information, AIRE stands for Italian Association of Scientists in New York. We have this chapter in New York City, and is a non-profit organization that aims to bring together Italians in the city. So we organize a lot of cultural events, but also scientific, and what we want to do is to nurture collaboration, scientific, and not only, but also help all these Italian people that arrive in New York City. So if you want to know more about AIRE, just please stop by and talk to me later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elena. Among other things, Andrea, talking about cross-disciplinary work, we bring groups of AIRE scientists, hardcore scientists, to the opera at least a couple of times a year. It's an introduction to hardcore humanities and arts. And I would like also to take the opportunity to thank the Consul General of Italy, Fabrizio Di Michele, for the support he gave us and for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to discuss a very exciting book that I can't wait for you to learn more about. We're joined tonight by Andrea Prencipe, full professor of organization theory and innovation at LUIS and former rector magnificus of LUIS, which also happens to be my alma mater and a wonderful school. Also on the panel with us tonight are Josh Whitford, the associate professor and director of graduate studies in the Department of Sociology at Columbia. Thank you for joining us. Dennis Yi Tenen, did I say that right? Fantastic. Who's an associate professor of English and comparative literature at Columbia, where he also co-directs the Narrative Intelligence Lab. Benedetta Audia, who is the principal of International Development LLC, a firm advising private sector companies in international development and business matters, and providing counsel to NGOs, multilateral organizations. We'll delve into all of these fantastic backgrounds later on tonight. And also with us is Ennio Ranaboldo, former CEO and current board member of Martin Bauer North America, and a former executive VP and CEO of Lavazza North America. So this is our star-studded cast here. But of course, we're all here to discuss The Grammar of Innovation, a very exciting book by Andrea and Massimo Steri, who is his co-author. This book obviously draws inspiration from the 6 Memos for the Next Millennium by Italo Calvino, one of our foremost Italian writers and one of my personal favorites. And Andrea saw, through the prism of Italo Calvino, lessons, teaching us about innovation and a lot of different things that we want to delve into tonight. So I want to kick this off by asking Andrea about the inspiration behind this book and what is it about for those in the audience who haven't had a chance to read it just yet.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. Good evening to everybody, and thanks to Stefano for hosting us, and thanks for you coming along. Hi, I say hi to Fabrizio Di Michele, who has been the engine behind this presentation. Of course, thanks to all the panelists. What was the inspiration? Let me tell you a brief story about it. Everything started when I was appointed deputy rector at Lewis University, and when I decided to move, as we say in academic terms, I moved to the dark side of the force, because if you are a pure researcher, you are in the kind of nice side and you keep doing research. But if you move into the admin role, in an admin role, then you move on to the dark side. And one of my colleagues, who is now an emeritus professor, Leonardo Morlino, is actually the most cited living Italian political scientist. He said, well, he gave it to me, a very old copy of Lezioni Americane, the 6 memos, but also gave to me a book by a mathematician who had been inspired by the 6 memos and wrote a math book on it. So that struck me. I said, well, how can a literary meditation, in fact, because Calvino was asked by Harvard University to write and give these lectures, who actually never gave because he passed away earlier than before coming to the US. How can he have inspired a mathematician? And by the way, I did try to read that book, and unfortunately, since I'm not a mathematician, I didn't go beyond page 10 or page 12. So I started reading and going through the original 6 memos, and I've realized that it was, in my opinion, a way to read and understand and interpret innovation as a social phenomenon. I'm a social scientist myself, so that was something that struck me. But I didn't think to write a book out of it. But what the other sort of moment, the kind of the spark was, believe it or not, soon after the second and last lockdown we had in Italy because of COVID. Our communication people at Lewis asked me to shoot a brief video clip for our students to tell the students how Lewis had reacted to the lockdown. And then I'd used the 6 concepts to tell students how we had reacted. And then, again, by going through them, lightness and multiplicity and quickness, I said, you see, let me go back to the idea of writing a book about the 6 memos and innovation. So it was Calvino and innovation as a social phenomenon, not as a technological phenomenon. And it was, and I've been, at that time I was discussing this topic with Massimo Sideri, who is also an economist. He was very fond and very keen on innovation. In fact, he writes about science and innovation for Corriere della Sera. And he said, well, why don't we try to do something together about Calvino and innovation? So we started off with this, with a bit like, writers writing for a novel for a daily paper, like in the old times. So we wrote 1 lecture at a time. We published it in the Corriere della Sera. The first was, of course, lightness. Then we went on with the other lectures, and then after experimenting with Calvino and innovation, we said, well, probably there is a book here, and in fact there was a book. There was a book, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. What I took away from the book is your reading of Calvino focuses on his ability to sort of obviously appreciate the values that he chose to focus on, but also see within them their opposite, and sort of this tension within each value married to its opposite, and how that informs his writing, but also obviously the different how you read it in terms of, the influence it has on innovation and the way we think of innovation. So you say in the book, you're centering with the grammar of innovation, the generative dance between the juxtaposition of two concepts. Those are opposites, of course. So how do we go about turning that into action?
Well, this is what we call this continuous tension between a concept of a lessons, that by Calvino say lightness, and its opposite, its antonym, is what we call the Calvino's method. Mm-hmm. And we call it Calvino's method because with Massimo, we thought that's a way to really read innovation as a social phenomenon. As a matter of fact, innovation grows out of tension. Let me give you an example. Technology is rapid, evolves very rapidly, Calvino would have said. But in order to grow, to make sure that technology is there, is created, oftentimes relies on science, and science is slow. So that's the first tension. It's like, it's quickness and slowness at the same time. And at the same time, there's another dynamics that innovation has to take into account, which is human beings. We are very slow in adaptation. We're very slow in adopting new technologies. So that's the tension that it pervades any single innovation. And that's why we thought that by using this method, by using this tension as a way to read but also act upon innovation, Calvino could say, and in fact does say a lot about it. And going straight to your question, how can we act upon? How can we put into context these ideas? Well, the first thing is to become aware of this tension. Innovation is paradoxical, as I mentioned. If we take it, say, another lesson, which is one of multiplicity. As a matter of fact, if we look at our phone, it is an interesting combination of several technologies. And this is increasingly so. But at the same time, you need to put together all these technologies in just one product. And that's, again, it's, if you wish, it's multiplicity and uniqueness. So that's something that's comes along very well.
That's true. Another key concept in the book is that of sort of interdisciplinary approaches, right? Calvino says to the students, he writes for the students that he's fascinated with all these different fields of knowledge. He was in a brief period of his life, he went into studying scientific, I believe he was an agronomist or something along those lines. He had a technical background and then sort of veered into literature, and that's where he found his place. But he had a family of folks who were also scientifically minded and inclined. So he really drew on this interdisciplinary thinking in his own practice. And of course, you do so as well in the book and highlight the importance of that. Can you speak a little bit about that and how that informed your work in academia as well as a rector, and the importance of an interdisciplinary approach when we talk about education?
Yeah, of course, let me confess that I'm truly biased, as Stefano was mentioning at the beginning, and when it comes to interdisciplinarity. And I like the fact that you mentioned interdisciplinary thinking, because interdisciplinarity does not go against disciplines and such. We do need specializations. We do need hardcore scientists. We do need hardcore humanists. We do need hardcore social scientists. Because disciplines cannot and should not actually be dissolved. But what we do need, following Calvino, it's actually following his approach. He was a writer, but he had been exposed to science. He would read the Scientific American every month to get inspired, to get inspiration. He would read about computer science. He would read about science thanks to his familiar, family background. And given this exposure that I believe, and I'm making really a big jump in perspective, that he had developed this very interesting vision about, we would say, the future of everything. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned at the beginning, the six memos surely tells a lot to humanists about the future of the literature, but tells a lot to me as a social scientist about the future of social sciences. And also tells a lot also to hardcore scientists. I was, during the few early on, I was saying that there's an interesting text by Calvino entitled Cybernetic and Ghosts, where he literally predict the advent of ChatGPT. He calls it macchina letteraria. So something, a machine that would have written novels instead of writers. So, and he was right at the time. And he was also right, let me close with this, about the question he was posing to himself. Because he said, in the light of this innovation, which are the traits of us human beings that we need to keep and maintain as very jealously. So what makes us human beings? What make being a human means? So he was asking also the right questions about the future of us as human beings in the light of a major technological change.
Absolutely. And that is such a good segue into a conversation with Dennis, who, of course, as I mentioned, is Associate Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia, co-director of the Narrative Intelligence Lab there, and also a former software engineer, or a current software engineer, I guess. You know, can you ever be a former software engineer? I'm not too sure. But someone who came from that world and then with a passion for language all throughout, then decided to fully delve into narrative and literature. So with that in mind, you've spent your career thinking about languages, obviously very different languages from coding ones, you know, when you were at Microsoft, coding the structures of the software that we all use in our day-to-day, which is phenomenal, to now obviously researching literature and computational humanities. So can you tell us a little bit about language as the role it has? How different and similar are all of these different languages? And when you think about a grammar of innovation, what comes to your mind?
Thank you for the introduction. So, you know, one of the hats I wear is a historian of language and historian of grammars, actually. So the very idea that language, something that is, you know, seems natural to us, and we all sort of learn it from being children. And the fact that underneath language there could be some rule-based system that is, you know, open to kind of human interpretation and open to change. So there's a long history in linguistics, in literary studies, kind of it's a search for this particular grammar. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And then the second thing is also, and I think that's obvious in this book, is to the extent to which human experience and language is resistant to rule-based systems. And these are the ways in which, whether it's innovation or whether it's you know, creativity, or there's kind of trying to, you know, capture that lighting in the bottle, trying to capture that magical moment where all of a sudden there is cooperation and synchrony and harmony between people, and kind of the resistance of that magic to any rule-based systems. And I think that's often where my research and frankly, like when I fall asleep, that's what I think about.
That's so interesting. And I know we talked about the fact that you have sort of a systems way of looking at languages and an engineering approach to language, if that makes sense. And you mentioned to me something very liberating that I think everybody can go home with and feel good about, that creativity can actually be engineered. So can you say more about that, and you know, how does that relate to the concepts that we're delving with in the book? We're delving into in the book.
Right. I mean, I think there's a particular notion about creativity and intelligence and kind of all of these, again, very human things. And it comes, you know, it's a romantic notion. It's a notion that you're just born with creativity. You're born with language. You're born... you know, the ideas that you have in your mind, they're kind of like uniquely yours. But I often think about how especially in today's world, in a complex world, most of the things that we think about, the things we know, like simple things, I don't know, how far away is the moon? Like maybe the kids know this better than, but I don't know, I have to look it up. Most of the things, most of the devices, most of things I know they are created in groups. They're assembled in a way that, you know, we were talking about, like Adam Smith says about, like, look at your coat, look at your clothing, and how many people does it take to bring this clothing to you and to have this nicely tailored thing that only, you know, a few hundred years ago, only like a king, says Adam Smith, would be able to wear garments such as these. And if that's true for physical manufacturing of actual goods, it's doubly true for intellectual goods. It means that when you write, even when you write a simple sentence, when you write your email, you know, you're writing that email and that, you know, Gmail is completing, it's suggesting the next word. Well, that's also manufactured. Like literally hundreds, thousands of people, engineers, lexicographers, designers, brought that experience to you. And the sentence that you originally thought is yours, you were like, thank you, Mom, goodbye, or whatever, just move my meeting to 10 o'clock. But that sentence was, you know, a whole crowd of people participated in the manufacture of even the simplest sentence.
Mm-hmm. And how does that relate to the elephant in the room today, which is ChatGPT and AI? Obviously, Andrea mentioned that importantly, but I know that you read The Grammar of Innovation and thought of ways that we can relate to AI through it. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and you know, I have to say my favorite chapter is the chapter on likeness that you mentioned, and Calvino and in your work, you know, you talk about this, the likeness of software, and also the ease, you know, so ChatGPT, these interfaces, they're designed to feel effortless, right? I mean, it saves you labor, and in a way that you know, a coffee machine saves you labor from doing the whole process. But so there's the kind of the illusion of likeness, but what it obscures, that illusion, it obscures, I would argue, the labor that goes into the manufacture of that likeness, right? So ChatGPT, if, you know, so I often say, like, imagine rolling the credits for ChatGPT. So, you know, you see a movie, and at the end it says, okay, it was Fellini, but okay, also he had a cinematographer, and I mean, there's a whole team, and the credits. So imagine after using ChatGPT, you roll the credits. And those credits, you would be there for hours. The credits would be immense. And that's sort of, I think, that for me, the tension, you know, the heaviness of the elephant, the tension, it feels effortless. But beneath the surface, you have actual energy expenditure. You have infrastructure. They're concrete data centers. They're bunkers. They're people with machine guns and air defense systems protecting the computational resources that make that effortless conversation with intelligence possible.
Absolutely. And also on the lightness note, you know, it was one of the quotes that I stashed away for this conversation is one that I think borders on clairvoyance, and I know you obviously wrote about this in the book as well. I'll quote from Calvino: "It's true that software cannot exert the power of lightness except through the heaviness of hardware, but it's the software that's in charge." And so I appreciate the fact that you're contextualizing the heaviness of software as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I would say that the tension between the two. You know, and speaking, another favorite part from the book that I wanted to highlight is that, you know, the figure of Engelbart and kind of the various people who brought us these, you know, like basic interfaces, the mouse, the video camera, the Zoom call, you know, the first video conference. And so I was looking, and so Doug Engelbart, his lab was one of, in the 60s, I think, they developed, for example, the mouse, and I mean, some of the stories are in the book, you can read them. But then the other thing they developed, and that's kind of what I write about, is one of the first word processors. So imagine, like, in the land of typewriters and in the land, you know, of pens, for the first time, somebody uses like a screen, and they can copy and paste. And so they had people in the lab writing in this way, and they were asking them to document their experience. And what people wrote about is the lightness and is the freedom from hardware. So people were like, you know, normally I'm so nervous to use the typewriter because if I make a mistake, it's a huge pain in the butt. I have to like get the white out, and it's like I'm committing. But here, the pixels adhere lightly. I can just like copy and paste, delete. If I may make a mistake, it doesn't matter. And so, but it's the tension between the software and this experience of kind of being free from the material world, from the typewriter ribbon, from the ink. You're free from that, but at the same time, there is this kind of other material reality of the computer reality that is so alien to us. How does a computer work? I don't know how storage. I mean, it's like on the quantum molecular level. Like magnetic storage is actually like incredibly complicated, and we lose some of that connection. Like I love writing with the pen. I'm sure many of you do here. Having nice, beautiful, made in Italy stationery. It's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing to have. And that's for me the tension between the physical, the hardware and the software of intellectual activity.
Absolutely. I want to kick it to Josh Whitford, who is an associate professor and director of graduate studies in the Department of Sociology at Columbia, has researched a lot in terms of comparative political economy, a number of different things having to do with outsourcing and network failures within those systems. So definitely more of a sociological slant to the conversation. And so I was curious to hear from him about, what does a Calvino method look like applied to sociology? Does that make the method for sociology lighter, more open to multiplicity, more narrative? What are some of the things you took away from the book that relate to the world of sociology?
So thank you for that introduction. I think I'm going to try, first I'll say it works well with the kind of sociologist I think of myself as, which is not a very disciplinary sociologist.
An interdisciplinary one.
Yeah, I mean, or a sociology that actually thinks of itself as a crossroad, that it is a discipline we're in conversation with each other. Like my own background is my undergraduate degree is in mathematics. I have a major in math, and then I added a major in Italian because I didn't want to graduate and I wanted to go do a study abroad in Italy. And then when I was in Italy, I just stayed for a little longer. I started studying philosophy at the University of Bologna, and then I went back to get a PhD in sociology. And in sociology, I got very into pragmatist social theory. And I started using that to study actually outsourcing and ran across some work by Andrea in particular called like Why Firms Know More Than They Make. So now to connect these threads a little bit. In pragmatism, there's this idea around innovation, Walt Whitman has this line, which is, I contradict myself very well then. I am large. I contradict myself very well. Then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Right. Calvino. So that's this idea of just this explosion of idea and creativity that's important to innovation. Calvino is bringing back the tension, the other side of that. Like an innovation is not just, I did something different. It needs to speak to something. It needs to speak to a problem, which is part of the thing that the actual pragmatists like James and Dewey, this gets brought back in sociology, particularly in work a guy named Hans Joas talks about the creativity of action, the day-to-day creativity that's needed to sort of get through life. And you sort of have a routine, and when you're surprised by something, that's where innovation sort of comes from. There's a line by James, which is like, the secret of the continuous life which the universe knows by heart and acts on every instant cannot be a contradiction incarnate. If logic says it is one, so much the worse for logic. Logic being the lesser thing, the static, incomplete abstraction must succumb to reality, not reality to logic. Our intelligence cannot wall itself up alive like a poop in its chrysalis. It must act at any cost, keep on speaking terms to the universe that engendered it. The idea of that Calvino was working with, when you talk about the Calvino method, is this idea of you have ideas, but you run into experience, you run into reality, you run into problems, and you look for ways to solve them. Around innovation, and this is the story we move into where it sits with my own work around sociology and Andrea's work, one of the things that Dennis just said is like these innovations happen across the globe. They're putting together all sorts of things, but how do you know how to fit things together? That's a fundamental problem. That's sort of tension of recognizing what the other is doing. That is like you need to know people need to have a grammar and some way of talking to each other, and they need to say some way of saying, oh, that worked, right? That actually worked. And that's the kind of problem that you actually need to go out and look at the world. You need to test things against reality. And that's the kind of, like you have a grammar, but does it work? You say something, and Dennis is giving examples of that. Like you try it. Hey, did this work for you? You're sort of moving back and forth between the tension and what resonates. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so to the question about can innovation be grammatically correct? What I'm hearing from you is we're needing a language to communicate with each other. Kind of doesn't matter if it's grammaticato, the Italian, if our grammar is poor, as long as we understand each other within, what we're trying to accomplish. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, so one of the things that he talks about in the book is like the routinized action. He draws on Pentland and Feldman. Like he talks about the ostensive and the performative aspects of a routine, of a grammar, right? The ostensive aspect is the rule. And so, but the performative is what you do when you put the rule into action. And like you say, it's grammaticato, or what language I use here, and you have to see what works with somebody else, and that's experiential, right? The sort of hard experience of interacting with others. Like a grammar by itself is not a language. A grammar it has to be collective. Like, I can read I learned my Italian grammar, but I really learned to speak Italian being in Bologna. Right? And by watching people's faces and that back and forth. And that's similar to the kind of thing I think he's trying to get at, and the book is trying to get at in the sort of Calvino method, which is like there's a set of rules, but you have to actually put them into experience and try them out. And that's actually that's a collective, language is sort of collectively held, and moving back and forth between those things, that idea of some contradictions actually can just sit. They don't matter. They matter when, something actually doesn't work, right?
That makes sense. When it comes to, academia, right? Obviously, you are a director of graduate studies at Columbia. We've talked about the importance of interdisciplinary thinking in your relationship with students and encouraging, young, bright minds to express themselves and be the best that they can be. Can you talk a little bit about, how you approach innovation and the grammar of innovation in your academic practice with students?
It's funny, there's two ways to think about this. One is myself as a professional researching sociologist who studies industrial economic development policy and looking at what's being done to the innovation ecosystem in this country and the kind of innovations that are going to happen. And then there's in teaching. On the one, you sort of have to, I'm just going to go to the teaching one because the first one's too depressing at the moment. It's like if you destroy. Anyway, let's just leave that aside. We can come back to that. On the teaching one, something Dennis and I have in common, which we just found out, maybe should have known. We both teach at Columbia. We both teach in contemporary a course in the Columbia's core called Contemporary Civilization, where we go to run from Plato to Foucault, running across the holy texts and other sorts of things. And in teaching, a big part of what you're trying to get students to do is to, how to put this? The hardest thing in teaching is to know what students know. You're moving back and forth with them, and you're pushing them, and you're seeing where they're confused. So we're teaching these different. So he's in English, I'm in sociology, and we're teaching the same text, and we're talking to each other about, hey, we were just talking about, what do you do that works with students? Oh, how does that resonate with them, right? So you're trying to sew around the kind of concepts in here, lightness was talked about, but we could talk about consistency or coerenza, coherence. Is this idea consistent with that idea? is that a contradiction? Why does that contradiction matter? One of the things, and that sort of effort in teaching is, again, to get students to think about, could it be this different way? What's the opposite of that, right? So, that's actually, even in this, the concept that Calvino has of like the opposite. What is the opposite of something? Is it, in fact, depends. Sort of like there's a line in Luminaire's song, the opposite of love is indifference. It's not hate, right? It's sort of like, so in teaching, you're often working, the idea of trying to force students to bring different sorts of ideas together, I think is, like Andrea says, he forces students to read humanities. Just learning sociology makes you a bad sociologist, actually, because you need to have some experience of the world.
Right.
You need to understand how other people think.
That's so well said. I want to speak with Benedetta Audia right now, who is, as I mentioned, the principal of International Development LLC, her firm advising a number of stakeholders and companies in very complex matters that she'll tell us more about. But I want to highlight the fact that she comes from a long career as a corporate legal advisor at the United Nations. She spent over 20 years negotiating very tough issues, including, the removal of chemical weapons in Syria, just to name one. You've faced, very tough folks in corporate boardrooms, in the real world, in war-torn countries. You're kind of a superstar, So that's, no pressure for anybody else. But I want to talk to you as someone who obviously comes from the legal field, a field that's so, strict in terms of its grammars, right? There's, it's characterized by a language that's very specific. There's rules. There's very little room for flexibility. But maybe you'll tell me otherwise. How do you apply the Calvino method in your day-to-day legal practice, dealing with such complex matters?
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Andrea, for inviting me here tonight. It is such an interesting discussion, and it's a question which is really relevant in my area of work, because everyone thinks of lawyers as the naysayers. So either you basically identify problems, at least in-house, right? Mm-hmm. If you go around in the UN system, you don't find that many lawyers who try to find solutions to very complex problems. It's all about let's find a way not to do things because that's prohibited. So I was a bit of an outlier in that context, because to me, what matters the most is what beneficiaries ultimately receive. Mm-hmm. And Calvino really inspired my career throughout the years, because I don't see structure as an obstacle to innovation. Mm-hmm. That's what he teaches us. It's like, in literature, structure can be a source of immense creativity. Mm-hmm. And so long as we recognize that legal systems are built on grammars, yes, absolutely. But you think of it as not as an obstacle, but as something you need to work within. Mm-hmm. And also, think of the rules of a classical sonata or, a poem. You have to work within those rules, but there is room for innovation. And I apply these concepts in my work as a professor, since we've been talking about the role that teachers have in students' lives and how important they are in shaping their careers, but also their futures. And of course, you also teach at GW Fordham and Lewis. Is that right? Correct. Yes, correct. Mm-hmm. So that's what why I think it is important to keep that in mind. And I wish more lawyers could be attending this discussion tonight, because it always has to be an instrument that allows you to reach a certain objective. Mm-hmm. I'd like to mention something about the concept of lightness that Andrea talks about. And it's important because it is not viewed as a synonym for triviality, but it's in contrast, is a counterweight to heaviness. And it is that heaviness that calcifies institutions and constitutes an obstacle to innovation. So innovation in law requires lightness of mind. And it's not superficiality, but it's the ability to lift concepts out of their traditional form and see what innovation, what else they might become. And so we've been talking a lot about technology, and as you said, it's the elephant in the room. Everybody's talking about how technology is going to shape our lives going forward and how it has shaped our lives so far. But I think the most powerful legal innovation I have seen doesn't come only from technology. It comes from these moments where we allow ourselves to be more literary, like more speculative, more metaphorical, more willing to imagine a world which is not yet written in a precedent.
That's so beautiful. I also know that the memo on multiplicity spoke to you directly. Can you tell us a little more about that?
It does. Multiplicity resonates with me because that's what I see. It mirrors the reality I encounter in my work every day. And whether I'm in negotiation with corporate giants or mediating disputes in post-conflict regions, I am constantly navigating through a web of different perspectives, histories, and truths. And so multiplicity in Calvino's sense is the ability to hold all of that complexity without needing it to reduce it into a single flattened storyline. And so Calvino describes multiplicity as literature's power to absorb and transform vast volumes of meaning, within systems. But that doesn't mean that becomes incoherent. And so that image, for me, captures exactly the role of a negotiator or a legal innovator, because our job is not to simplify complexity out of existence, but to structure it, to make sense of it. And finally, what I'd like to say is that there is also something ethical about multiplicity, right? It recognizes that every party brings a different perspective to the table, a different narrative. And the goal is not to erase these differences, but to braid them into something new. And in my experience, that's where the most durable agreements come from. And that's also where I see the success of this human-centered innovation.
Absolutely. And I know you also really find it important to approach your work in an interdisciplinary way. Mm-hmm. I know everybody here spoke a little bit about what that means to them, but can you say a little more about what it means to you specifically?
Sure. So interdisciplinary thinking isn't optional in negotiations. It's essential. And that's because every negotiation is an ecosystem. There is law, but there is psychology, there is culture, there is strategy, there is power dynamics, and then you have the unspoken emotional currents that need to be taken into account in negotiations, right? And so you need to be fluent in all of these different languages. And Calvino reminds us that the world can't be captured by a single system of thought. And again, in Multiplicity, writes about literature as a way of weaving them together, right? Weaving many systems together: mythological, psychological, philosophical, scientific, without forcing them into hierarchy. And so think about this. A legal argument might look great on paper, but if it ignores the emotional truth in the room, it will fail. And a great strategy may look brilliantly analytical, but if it doesn't resonate with the narrative of the identity, the other of all parties, it won't land. So the most transformative negotiations I have been involved in are the ones where someone succeeded not because he or she mastered the legal brief, but because they were able to listen like a therapist, speak like a poet, but then at the end of the day, they were able to land the deal like a lawyer. And so once you're able to combine all of these different languages, that's when true success can be achieved.
Absolutely. Many disciplines, that's right. Dulcis in fundo, last but not least, Ennio Ranaboldo. We talked a little bit about your background, but I'd like you to expand a little bit on that as well, because it's kind of unconventional, right? You also come from a literary initial phase of your career. You were very focused on J.D. Salinger's work. You've authored a book published by Murcia about him specifically. You've taught in schools. You've moved across the world to New Zealand, came back and entered the corporate world, and have led. Big mistake. Well, I don't know. I'm based on this resume, I don't think it was, but you've led countless multinational businesses to success over 20 years of your work. And you're also involved in mentorship as well with Talenti in Corso. I know this is a program that Stefano and you also are part of together. So I know that with your literary sensibility in the corporate world, there must be lessons that you took away from learning about the words and language. And we talked about how exactitude means a lot to you in your work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I'm very happy to see a few faces here because I would like to start by saying a few words about innovation. I say we because we don't come from the rarefied space of technology or sophisticated multinational deal making. I come from food. And food is something that you eat and drink. And innovation fails miserably, 95% of the time. So the real pain is how do we operate in a world where no matter the technology, no matter the structures, no matter the money, the capital, innovation is known for being a huge, painful, constant failure. So the first order of business is, why is that? Because, back to what Andrea was saying, what is still defining us as humans is that we eat, and we cannot eat bites in the technological sense of the world. And for as long as we eat and drink and do all those human functions, the whole game stays very, very, very interesting. And in our space, I guess that the real challenge is how to leverage the best technology, which is always insufficient, how to leverage the best talents, the founders of the world, that are legends in themselves, but they are not producing consistent results, and how do we operate in the middle space where we churn out better products that stay in the market and not get listed after five weeks. And how does that relate to Andrea's work and language and exactitude? I think that the thing that I love the most is that I believe that Calvino, whom I personally don't like very much, except for the 6 memos, but that's besides the point entirely, Calvino was a master of persuasion. And I would like to quote another master of persuasion, which was Carlo Michestetter, the young philosopher who took his life age 23 after his master thesis. He wrote this book. His thesis was La persuasione e la retorica, persuasions and rhetoric. And I love what Andrea did with Calvino's 6 memos, because in this world of uncertainty, failure, what kills innovation is rhetoric. And what innovation requires is the exactitude of language and persuasion. And that's key. And what is rhetoric in our world? Corporate, politics, PowerPoints, group thinking, all the bullshit that constantly makes innovation a miserable failure. It's a little bit like restaurants in New York City, right? Out of 100 restaurants, 95 will fail within 6 months. Out of 100 products, no matter whether they are investigated research at Pepsi, Unilever, Martin Bauer, and Lavazza, 96% will fail. And so the idea that there is a moment of clarity whereby different actors can come together in a space and find or rebuild a language of exactitude, of rigor, and not relying dumbly on quantitative data, let alone on qualitative data, but going beyond this kind of binary world. Oh, numbers rule, words are for losers, okay, which is really what we hear in many, many R&D centers, recombining the beauty of working with exact words to define a brief, relying on quantitative intelligence coming from the market, what would define such a process as persuasion compared to the rhetoric, which is killing not just the quality of innovation, but it's actually killing the pleasure of working in, say, an R&D center. Now, as far as my background, I was a proud primary school teacher, and then I don't know really what happened. I ended up working for a company, but that's really besides the point. I think we are still relishing, enjoying very much the Michele Ferreros of the world. Genius is real. Okay, creativity can be engineered, yes, but genius is rare, but it's very real, okay? I met some of them. Michele Ferrero was one of them. This guy never got a product wrong. Why is it that multi-billion-dollar R&D center get most of their products wrong? Okay, that cannot really be engineered. That stays an open question. But I believe that we talked a lot about interdisciplinary and multiple actors. I think that the ability of recognizing genius where genius is also a function of what innovation should all about. Is it sufficient? Certainly not, but it's very necessary. And I believe that, to Andrea's book, the idea of bringing, rebuilding a grammar, or rebuilding a language, or building a language that brings all of these components together and makes our thought process, and even the way we prompt our machines, okay, more accurate. I mean, it's everybody's experience, right? What shit comes in, the saying, right? So even just prompting ChatGPT or Gemini or DeepSeek, the quality of the outcome is usually very bad. Not because the machine is stupid, because we are stupid. We are not even able to, brief with one line for a very specific instruction. So I think there is a lot in the idea of building a language, and I pay tribute to the exactitude and the quality of persuasion, because that's what would make also our people thrive and giving them a chance to cut through the many encumbrances that innovation in real companies and organizations usually have to deal with. Long range, possibly very unclear, but I hope that,
That covers a lot, and I'm curious if you can expand on the fact that innovation in your field it's embodied, right? The products that you're putting out in the world are products that we eat and taste, and so there's like a stopgap to what works and what doesn't because we feel it in our bodies, right? Is there can you talk a little bit about that reality of innovation in your field and how you conceive of it compared to all of the different fields where innovation is sort of intangible, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that cannot be engineered because we know a million products that were simply, but that's also what makes us human, right? And interesting in terms of, you take the most amazingly structured innovation protocols and procedures and then you run millions of panels, right, Eugenio? And the product still freaking fails. So there is something in the grammar of innovation and in the reaction not just of the individual body as a consumer, in the collective body and the perception that cannot be reduced to a model, which makes the life of marketers and innovators very, very interesting. And that's also the reason why most large companies kind of hate of innovation, because they rather retrench in the core product. COVID is a very great case in point. We almost went out of business because all of a sudden the major corporations stopped innovating altogether. Who needs another 1,000 new SKUs when the core products are not even selling? So the temptation is always retrenching around the core of what sold or what was successful. What I think makes the life of innovators in the food and beverage business or in any business where products are digested is that there is a component of total unpredictability that cannot really be written down in any shape or form. Or maybe it will. It's a little bit like the stock market. No matter the technology, we still lose money, right? Who doesn't? Okay, we make money sometimes, but we also can stand a very fair chance of losing money. So that is because, again, the body is involved, the collective bodies are involved, the perception is involved, intrinsic quality is involved. And let me give a very, very still example, right? So most Italians think that Starbucks, I'm not talking about the competitor because I love it, it's all right, Italian. Starbucks coffee is bad and German coffee is bad. Okay, that's really the common sense. Starbucks buys the best coffees in the world and has been doing so for the past 35 years. And German coffee is one of the best coffee you can drink in the world. So you see how you can engineer all you want around the product that's best, but the gap between what you do as an innovator and what actually lands and how the whole narration around the product stays very much not computable, which I think it's a great opportunity. It's not just a challenge.
Maybe German coffee needs a better PR machine.
Yeah, exactly.
You touched upon data and numbers, and I want to quote from Calvino and actually from Andrea's point here about our obsession with numbers and figures in our society. Andrea writes in the book, "In a digital society governed by binary codes, we seem to understand only that which can be brought back to a finite. We seem to understand only that which can be brought back to a finite univocal number." So data. How does that relate to the work you do, given that obviously there are so many variables that are not quantifiable, right? That have to do with perception and bodies, as you explained, but back to the corporate life and how we persuade each other of things in that setting. How does that work, and how do you see through it?
I'm smiling because everybody in corporate would say that they stand by data, they operate by data. This is 90% BS. Okay, of course, if you say that in any boardroom as a key statement, you come across as a hardcore guy, right? And of course, numbers matters and figures matter. A lot of the decisions are predicated on numbers. But you would be surprised across the entire corporate world how much boils down to I like it, I don't like it, no matter what the numbers are. So again, it's a coexisting of a hardcore quantitative base that, it's like you cannot possibly do without, but ultimately the whole complexity of the decision-making process, otherwise you can explain the failures, right? If we all operate on data, why is it that we fail so many times? Data are data. Yes, but they tell a part of the story. That's when the Calvinos and the critical thinking coming from deep attention, profound listening, to a different set of text coming to the picture, because data by themselves are worth zero. You have to give those numbers a house, a home, and for that home you need a language, and that's why great books are still around, right? Last time I checked, yeah.
Right.
So thank you, Andrea, for your work with Calvino.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to be conscious of time. We are about 15 minutes to 7. And before kicking it to the audience, I wanted to see if Andrea had any thoughts or questions for our panel here. I saw you scribbling furiously all throughout the different conversations that we had so far.
I'm actually collecting data for my next book on Calvino, so that's it. And I can tell you that I do have a lot of materials, because I was thinking, if I had the chance to give a new title to the book, I mean the one already published, I would have introduced another letter rather than entitling the grammar of innovation. I would have used again the plural, so the grammars of innovations, because as it is pretty clear, everybody was hinting at the fact that as much as we need some kind of rule-based behavior, rule-based decision-making, intuition is key. Call it, collective creativity or engineering. I was struck by Benedetta's approach to law at the UN. You reminded me of my father, who is an engineer, and it tells me that you got to find solution in respect of the law that you're going to be using. So engineering approach is key. It does require rules, but a lot of intuition, and that's where. Let me close. There could be actually questions to the panel, but also to the audience, that we desperately need to rethink the way we educate students. If we need to maintain our role in an AI-driven age, we need to rethink the way we educate students. If we need to focus on intuition, which are the human traits, over and beyond eating and drinking, which are, of course, and sleeping, that we like it a lot, but still, it's how do we train someone to be intuitive? How do we train someone to be creative? How do we train someone who actually asks the good questions to the machine? Because the answers are there. It's making sure that students learn how to formulate questions, how to rather than solving problems, which is key, but it's framing problems, which is even more important. And framing does require, of course, I'm biased, as Stefano has started off, does require humanities. It's getting the big picture, and I'm a social scientist, and I feel it to be. I behave like a social scientist. I ask social science research questions. But if you want to get a bigger picture, it's humanities that has the key levers to do that. And I'd also like the fact, just to close down on this, to wind up on this, is what Josh and Dennis were mentioning, is having actually a pragmatist approach. And you've got to be pragmatic. And also Ennio was hinting at it. I think it was pragmatic. It's something that is key. So.
Andrea, can you say a little bit about how students are interacting with AI technologies right now, and sort of, where do you see it going? Are we somewhere already where we need an intervention in academia about use of these technologies for the better, or are we ever going to go back? And I know Dennis is probably, breaking out in hives when I say that, but you know what I mean? Like, how are we using it for good in the context of learning?
Well, we do need to. We should make sure that students do experiment with AI to learn how to use it, and it's something that we need to be aware of it as educators. On the other hand, we should make sure that students become aware of the risks that AI does bring, in fact, to the table. And let me move away a bit from Calvino and go back to another fantastic Italian author whose name is Gianni Rodari. If Calvino had predicted the advent, the diffusion of the macchina letteraria, Gianni Rodari, in a short story, of course to kids, he wrote about, this is a short story which is beautiful, whose title is The Homework Machine. La macchina che fa I compiti.
I love that.
And he tells about the story about a guy who actually selling this homework machine, who does want money to sell this machine. He only wants, in inverted commas, of course, he wants the brain of the child. Okay.
Goodness.
But it says a lot about it. Because it doesn't use the concept, but that's the concept of cognitive offloading. If you let machine do whatever it wants, you're losing your creativity, your intuition, your ability to not to adapt, but to adopt and to govern the technology. That's the key issue. Do I have an answer for as an educator? No, but what I can tell you and I can share to everybody, this is what we have been doing, and I've been doing since I'm back in the classroom, although there's never coming back, there's always a new start, especially in this case. It's to let students experiment, but also making them aware, again, of the threats of this extremely powerful, very interesting machine that can support us in every respect but one. Going back to Ennio's point, intuition. Intuition is down to us. But we need to make sure to educate students to be intuitive. That's why we need, as I keep saying, to educate students to change, to innovation. And of course, I'm biased here as well because I'm a professor of innovation.
Absolutely. So the Calvino method becomes very relevant in the classroom. I know that you're working on other research related to Calvino, and you've already put out additional work inspired by his body of work. Can you say more about that?
Well, Calvino has allowed both Massimo and myself to build a window on the importance of literature and philosophy, in my case for education. And I'm glad there's a colleague from my university who's very much into this idea of bringing humanities in business education, in social sciences. And I do believe that especially in this world, which as I mentioned is going to be, and it is already AI-driven, we need to make sure that humanities do play a bigger role. So my next project is actually my current project is to understand how do we bring back humanities into educational paths. It's just what we do, for instance, at Lewis or IE University or even Columbia, exposing students to humanity courses and labs. That could be one point. Is it enough? I don't know. There could be other opportunities, other engineering approach to humanities or pragmatist approach to humanities. That's, I don't know, that we need to do research on it.
Absolutely. Let's open it up to our audience here in case there are any questions from the room to any of our panelists.
Yep.
In the back?
This is a very silly question, but does AI understand friendship? Like human friendship. Do they understand that? That is imitative, they pretend to know what they're talking about?
That's such a good question. I want to make sure that you repeat it in the microphone for everybody at home.
Hi, my silly question is, does AI understand friendship, such as human-to-human friendship and that kind of thing? Thanks.
Anybody? Dennis, our AI whisperer, maybe you can take a stab at this. Benedetta, everybody is qualified to answer. I just want to kick us off.
I think I want to go back to something you've said about, I do think that there's something about human experience that's intrinsically connected to our bodies, and that's the way the food industry, like, it's inescapable. And whether something is delicious, that's kind of joy of appetite, desire, or painful, the opposite, something that's disgusting. And those experiences, the aesthetic experience, the humanities experience, it's intimately tied to the body. And AI doesn't have a body. It cannot feel pain. It cannot feel delicious food. It can imitate those things, or you can reason with it. So I do think that's why I'm also less worried about it kind of taking over the food industry or the sex industry because fundamentally we humans suffer and enjoy each other in a very different way. And it doesn't, my joke always to my students is that, would you like to watch football, European football, played by supersonic robots? And the answer is no. It's not fun. You wouldn't. If the whole point of sport is to see the limits and the fragility of the human body, and that's not going anywhere. So friendship, no, not until there is embodied AI in some way.
And Walt Whitman would agree with you.
Benedetta, were you tickled by the question? Anybody else in the room? Please.
Do we need a microphone?
Yes.
Yes.
We have some for the recording. Yeah, that'd be best. Thank you.
As educators, can you tell if your students are abusing AI, and how do you go about it?
Well, when they come out uniformly stupid, it's because they're using AI. Yeah, you can tell.
If I may, as an educator, Francesca, the most important thing in my experience, but I'm very curious to know what my colleagues have to say, is not to demonize it and making them aware of the fact that we also know AI and are familiar with it and use it. And the other thing, very simple, that I started doing is that I'm not interested in the final outcome of your paper. I'm very interested in the prompts you give to the AI to get that result. Especially when I give them funny assignment. My elementary school teacher comes up every now and then, so I give them, like, give me a figurative representation of Machiavelli's The Prince, without using words, but only images. They use AI a lot because they say, we are not artists, so we cannot paint. That's totally fine. But I want to see the prompts, step by step. What did you ask in order to obtain that result? So if you don't demonize it and work with it, and you need to know a thing or two about it in order to work with them, because normally they're one step ahead of us, at least of me, but at the same time not demonizing it and making it a tool for teaching, I think has worked for me for the moment. But if you give them a topic, like I did 10 years ago for a paper, and then tell them 6 to 8 pages, double-spaced, 3 quotations, of course they're all going to run it through it. And but the problem is not running against AI, is just bringing it in and use it as it should be used, because it's the tool. But I'm very curious to know your...
So I have restructured the way I evaluate my students because of the use of AI. So I used to have a paper requirement in all of my courses. Now I've changed it to a journal requirement. I'm asking the students to write their personal reflections on each of the topics that are being covered in class. I have them participate in 2 role plays where they have to either simulate the role of a minister or a contracting agency in a developing country, and then they have to have that discussion, and then they have to present on their topic. And I do it in a way that ensures that they have to present themselves and they have to have the exchange with the other students. So I've had to change my evaluation method, And there is software that can now be used to identify whether AI has been utilized, and I've used it as well. So I instead of sanctioning the use of the system, I agree that it's better to see what can be made of it and how it can further their knowledge and understanding of the topics, because at the end of the day, what matters to me the most is that the courses that I teach are very practical and operational. To me, what matters is that one day, if they ever want to work for an international organization, they'd be able to do so from day one. And that's not something that any AI could, any software could teach them. They have to be able to think of a practical case study and see how they would work through it.
Anybody else in the room?
Joshua.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to.
Let's
I have
take a
strong
second for
feelings about
Josh.
that question, so I want to say
Absolutely.
something.
We'll get to you.
Which is that for me, it's important to distinguish between educating and evaluating, right? Like, and evaluating is a means to educate, because we are at some level when we educate, we're disciplining the students and stuff. But the fact that I have to rank them for capital is not my favorite part of my job. I'm trying to teach them, and I always go back to a thing that was taught. A friend of mine who went to law school said, if I practiced law the way I took the bar, I'd be disbarred. I'm teaching them to live in the world, to use things. I teach my class, I've always given open book exams, because I don't care if they can memorize what's here or there, at least for my classes. Teaching them to think, and they're using the tools that are there. Can they use their computers in class? Of course. Can they look stuff up? Of course they can look stuff up, as long as it doesn't disrupt the class. And yes, it can make some things harder on the evaluation side. It can make the class not run as well, because you do have to have some sense of fairness around the grades, because the reality is they react to grades. But you're trying to teach them, going to this point, it's the process. The point of getting a PhD, the product is always the student. It's not the exam, it's the student. It's the ability to do the exam. And yeah, it makes some stuff harder. The kind of thing you're doing, it can make us into better teachers, because we can't do lazy exams anymore. A certain kind of lazy examining is gone. And it does make it harder sometimes to do things at scale, because you can do multiple choice exams at scale and then they can cheat, and that's a problem. But
Just a quick answer based on my recent experience with AI. As a matter of fact, I've used AI to do my own syllabus, and I think it fared very well, I have to say. Of course, I remodeled it, but and the first thing I said to my students when I went back to classroom, say, you know what, you're going to be studying with a syllabus which I've been assisted by AI to do it. First thing. Second thing, I went back to the traditional way of evaluating students. Oral exam, pen and paper, but also AI-assisted exam, but with a method. Because otherwise, we and they run the risk of really doing cognitive offloading. As a matter of fact, the structure, the method I've used was pretty much structured. It would encourage students to reflect on the usage of AI. And the first reaction I had from my students was, I got a bit confused by using this structure, because it encouraged them to reflect on it. And this tells a lot about the abuse of AI, because they use it or abuse it doing cognitive offloading. And that's something that we should avoid, even ourselves. And I'm aware of it when I use it. So.
Yes.
I just wanted to thank you. I really appreciate the topic. There is a point that touched me, linked to what I am doing currently, also linked with Ennio, who invited to join here. In Italy, in food, we are famous around the world for our tradition. And often, most of the tradition were innovation at one point, and then they became tradition. And mostly the pattern to transform innovation into actually a common practice, it requires a narrative design and the development of kind of a theater around it. And all these start from words at the end and to link to imagination, I think. And so I believe those elements with AI, probably, and this is the question to you, aren't we sure that they will become too uniform in the thoughts of the audience, and then it will get to a point where there is no much of a distinguish between what actually comes out of a machine and what actually is the thought that we give back? If I spoke correctly, I hope.
I do have an answer, but please, go ahead. And
No,
go ahead.
Well, I don't think that will happen because, like I think we made it very, very clear. As long as what we know being human, and will stay so for physiologically for the next 10,000 years, maybe 5,000 years, so plenty of time to innovate. And I think that will be simply not a thing. The total uniformity of input and response. There will be more idiosyncrasies and differentiation that we can even think. And that will stay so as long as the dialogue is between technology and the body, and not between machines and machines. So it depends very much on the type of product. But I think that, and it's really kind of paying tribute to the human nature, as crooked as it is sometimes, we are incredibly open to new things, and I believe that will stay so as long as we don't block it for other reasons, right? So we have seen taste and flavors evolving over thousands of years. I don't see anything getting more simpler or standardized or homogenized anytime soon.
Yeah, I do have my answer, of course, is linked to Calvino. And in his lecture on visibility, as a matter of fact, is a lecture on imagination. He does encourage, he does tell, he does write about the need and the requirement about a pedagogy of imagination. So encourage people to imagine, to learn how to have a vision, if you wish, to put in more corporate terms. That's something that we need to, especially in this specific time that we live, we need to encourage students to learn how to become more imaginative if we want to maintain our human dimension and go over and beyond technicalities only.
I also found in that, a reference to sort of, from a journalist's perspective, the ability to recognize what's true and what's false. He really speaks to that and to visibility, to that delusion of images that we're confronted with and not being able to believe our eyes anymore, right? And that's I think something very important also to focus on.
But of course, you need to be trained to do that. That's the other thing. You need to be educated, not trained. Educated to do that. There's another question over there.
Another question in the back.
Oh, that was exactly the point I was going to say about intuition and ingenuity and creativity, and that we need to be trained in it. And to me, that is almost the opposite of that, right? Because who are the most creative and intuitive creatures are children who haven't gone through a whole indoctrination. So to me, it seems more about deprogramming rather than trying to training people, no?
Can I
Maybe
jump in?
it's the tension between opposites, right?
Yeah, it's the tension between opposite. I'm not sure whether I did write this what I'm saying in this book, but my take now is that, of course, as an educator, we all know that the universities, academia are places where we learn, okay, and we all agree about it. We're not longer the only place that generates knowledge, of course. But we are supposed to actually have a lead on it. But as much as we make it a place where we learn, we should make sure that students also learn to learn, but going to your point, also to unlearn, to relearn. It's kind of word game, but that's I believe that's our next mission. And I'm glad there is actually a student of mine, former student of mine, who has reinvented himself relatively recently. So probably, there is something that we are doing relatively well.
One more question, and then I think we'll be out of time. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This has been an amazing discussion. The question I have for you is, and this is my struggle with AI right now. I've been experimenting and working with my students, with other colleagues, but there is this thing that I'm struggling with that I call this trade-off between information and meaning. So it feels to me that, and AI is just the last of the many technologies that are drawing us into information deeper and deeper and deeper. Started with the internet, then social media, and then you name it, right? And then AI just brings this to the next level. A lot of information, and also you made me think about this, in your comment is, I'm wondering, the more information, the less creativity. There's a lot of the failures in innovation is because there's too much information. We look for too much information, and that's not the answer. So how do we teach our students maybe? And that's difficult because it's what you're going to do. You're going to take technology away from the classroom so that they have less information, or maybe reducing that exposure a little bit. Because information creates variety, to your point, but doesn't necessarily create meaningful solutions. So I don't know how you feel about this.
Does anybody want to go? Otherwise, I'll... Can I go? Okay. The universities are probably the long-lasting institutions ever. We compete with religions, with national governments. But as far as I understand, and I've read, we're probably the less innovative institution ever. The reason why I'm saying that is not because of my background. It's also because that it is now time to rethink our educational models, specifically in the light of what you just mentioned, because we have always thought that more information was better. But that's where we didn't have so much information. Now things have changed dramatically with so much information. So the difference, those who will have a lead are no longer those who have more information, as it used to be. It's down to those who are able to, I'm sorry, this is very common, but that's the only way I can say it, are able to connect the dots. So to connect information, to interpret information. And that's why we need innovation also in education. That's why I think that's my next research project is innovation in educational model. How do we make sure that students are educated to, as I mentioned earlier on, to learn to unlearn? How do we make sure that students are able to interpret the right versus wrong information? That's key. There are quite a few experiments going on around the world, but there's no, if you wish, there are no institutions, as far as I know, that are putting it on, as the key objective of their new strategic plan. This is something that we're not aware, or awareness is pretty much scattered. It's not systematically coherent as yet.
I think that's a good note to end on, and to kick the ball to the next time you'll have research for us to all discuss together.
Okay, sure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to the panel. Thank you to Andrea, and we'll see you next time.